Gambling is everywhere. In the streets, and even in our homes. But what kind of effect is this gambling advertising having on us?
For this film, I wanted to investigate the effects that the abundance of gambling advertising in modern day Australia had on a very overlooked demographic, youth.
So the harm is to youth from gambling advertisements is firstly cultural. Horse racing only existed for gambling, but not many young people knew the names of horses. They're heroes who play football and play cricket. They follow, they adore, they worship. And now gaming and gambling ads have changed the way young people speak. They speak about the odds of who will kick the first goal.
So these days, something that's really common is what we call risk-reducing promotions. And they're your cash back, cash out, money back kind of deals. When we've talked to young people in the past, kids as young as 8 can tell me, you know, if my team's winning at halftime but loses, I can get $50 cash back. And that's starting to create these perceptions of if they just have a bit of a go, then they might have a chance of winning.
The kids that are watching and paying attention and how they're being influenced, and the way that they're being influenced is possibly wanting more likely to make a bet, but also, and this is one of the big things the Foundation's very concerned about, it's having the process of normalising gambling as a part of sport, so that gambling is not something that you add on to sport or not something that you might do extra, but in fact inherent in following a sport is to gamble on the sport, is the sort of message that's being picked up.
Gambling advertising affects teenagers in multiple different ways. And not just that, but gambling itself does.
According to the Australasian Gambling Council, the average Australian spends $1,200 on gambling per year, with a total nationwide consumption of over $23 billion. And you may be surprised to know that it's not just adults.
With CrownBet, you'll earn rewards points to...
Gambling is illegal for people under the age of 18, but unfortunately this doesn't stop minors from engaging in the activity. According to a Purdy study from 2011, of 15 to 17-year-olds, 64% of them reported that they'd gambled at least once in the last year, and 28% reported that they'd gambled on sport.
One teenager in every classroom has a gambling problem, and 1 in 5 adults with gambling problems started gambling before they were 18. Not only this, but teens are 4 times more likely to develop gambling problems than adults. And it's not just problem gamblers who experience harm.
Low to moderate risk gamblers also experience harm, including poor academic performance, absence from school and other extracurricular activities, and disrupted relationships with family and friends. And that is in large part due to the advertising.
Gambling advertising by its very nature is deceptive. It's not just potential for deception, it is deceptive.
The advertising doesn't talk about risk, so there is a danger when you see something humorous, and then when you see within it there's promotions for things like free bets, money back, bonus bets, cash out, all those sorts of phrases, particularly to a child, indicate there's no harm in this at all.
Even with that considered, we hardly notice the amount of gambling advertising we actually see.
The gambling industry spent $236 million on advertising in 2015, up from just $91 million in 2011. And according to a Thomas and Lindsay study, if you went and saw an AFL game here, you would see an average of 58 gambling ads around the stadium.
And another 50 ads on TV at home, and 110 for the NRL. Now, kids aren't exactly supposed to see these ads because the legislation the government introduced ensures that they're only played after 8:30 p.m. But this isn't exactly effective.
You try putting someone to bed who's 12 at half time of a game, they're going to still see all the ads.
And even with this considered, there is often a more dangerous form of advertising. You know, during half-time of a footy game, just before the commentators come back to talk about the game, there'll be a guy standing there telling you about the odds for the upcoming games this weekend. Well, that is considered content by a large portion of young people because particularly young kids don't actually recognise it as an ad because it comes after the sponsors. And this can be particularly harmful because they don't actually realise they're being sold a product. Australia has developed a gambling advertising problem within its sport, and these advertisements aren't just limited to the TV.
The thing that we're most concerned about at the moment is the progression of advertising onto other media platforms such as social media, YouTube and general websites.
So when you have gambling infiltrating with massive advertising dollars spent on internet, online gambling, sports bet companies, you know that this works. They're not spending huge thousands, tens of thousands of dollars because it doesn't work.
If there's been that level of increase in spend, you can bet that the advertisers, the people paying for the advertising, think that it is influential.
Responsible Gambling Victoria lists a table that reports that internet advertising has gone from making up less than 1% of gambling advertising in 2010 to over 30% in 2014, and it's only climbed from there.
And the thing about internet advertising is that it doesn't have anywhere near the government regulation that TV advertising has. Which means that it's a free-for-all to appear on social media, pages, YouTube advertisements, and a plethora of other platforms. Now we've talked about how much advertising there actually is, I think we should move on to why it affects teenagers.
Differing from adults, the most common gambling advertising strategy for young people is normalisation with a call to action. Findings show that people with less judgment or who are less discerning have more automated processing. Teenagers do have less judgment because of their age, so they process things without as much thought. Therefore, call to actions are processed and registered automatically.
That's all well and good, but teenagers have a much different and more prominent way of interacting with advertising, and that is through social interaction.
Most often within gambling ads, they show guys at the pub, they show that it's something to do with your friends, everyone's having fun. And I think those messages, from what we found from young males over the age of 18, they're saying that it's mirroring their normal social interactions. So I think when you start seeing everyday scenarios with gambling linked with it, again, such as sport, that's when young people really start to take notice, and they just think that it's an everyday activity that people are always participating in.
What is probably successful in encouraging young men in particular to bond around gambling or to talk about gambling, which is again one of the points of the advertising, is to get people to talk about the product, is just using humour.
We have a generation where they've never watched sport without gambling ads, and so we're unsure how this will affect their future consumption. We don't know what will happen when they turn 18, but from what we know from alcohol and tobacco, if children perceive that an activity is normal or common or that everyone's doing it, they're much more likely wanting to try it.
According to a Moses and Mitchell study, an adolescent's frequency of interaction with their peers was a good predictor of their consumerism. What they buy is a result of their social interactions. And when we consider that, we can conclude that when gambling is introduced into adolescent social circles, it drives them to consume it. And this can be done through advertising.
It appears that the more advertising that's shown,
The more it reaches teenage social discussion,
and the more it drives consumption. But the question still remains, what can be done?
So we have utterly irresponsible governments in Australia. Let's just start with that. In fact, it's weak, and it's weak because governments here are in the pocket of gambling industry and the sports betting industry. We've had sporting bodies such as the AFL and Cricket Australia that have taken the huge sponsorship deals.
So I think there needs to be a real tightening of regulation in terms of how sporting codes and broadcasters, stadium owners deal with sports betting advertising as well. I think we need to see a ban during any time children could be watching TV, so that would be at least 8:30, but specifically during sporting programs, I think we need siren-to-siren bans where there would be no sports betting advertising or gambling advertising during the broadcast of a game.
I think getting the message out there that most people don't gamble on sports is actually a really important one.
So I think what's lacking at the moment with anti-gambling ads or gambling harm ads is diversity. We need to be seeing a range of people from a range of different backgrounds, range of different ages, on a range of different products, not just your typical pokey style ads.
There's also, particularly I think at the slightly younger ages, to get a real sense within the whole population of those kids going through that cohort of year 7s or year 8s or year 9s, that you're not going to win, that there's lots of risks, that you can do yourself harm.
gambling advertising is a problem. It's far too frequent across all forms of media, and it's having a major effect on youth. We need to start looking at potential solutions to a problem that's fast becoming a cultural affair.
Nowhere else in the world are young people being bombarded with gambling ads like your generation. We've been sold a lie to make some rich people, particularly overseas rich companies, even richer. We're the guinea pig. We aren't going to play. It ain't cool.